1, 2, 3.
Mai ngā tihi a pirongia ki ngā waipa ko wharahara. Koi orara ko ngā pukonga, me ngōna taniwha, me ngōna tupua. Hoi ara ko tawaka tainui ki uta, hāputa ko ngā iwi maha, pāora, ko ngā tia pakura e. Kai ngā uri a pakura, hoki mai ki te whanua.
Ki te uri a mai koe, whakapua kina ake. I heke ko mana, whenua i whea. I arangi e tui o nei, te rangi i Aotearoa. I a papa e takoto mai nei, ko ngā ururu, ko rangi Aotearoa.
Taki mana motu hake, taku ipu kārea, nei rā, ko mana wā, e apakura ti ana.
Rongi mai taku nui ki a.
Tā ngai ki te whenua, te motu kia. Ko te papa e takoto mai nei, ko rangi Aotearoa, rangi Aotearoa.
Hoki mai e ngā uni mahiu, nahi tere tere. Hoki mai ki ngā mahi tūpuna, ngā mahi hauhake. Tiri tiri a, haura kau kia tu ai tō whare. He tohu tēnei o te ora, tiri tiri a, rui rui a.
He whai mana.
No mai ki te tēnei hui. We were listening to the beautiful sounds of Te Wharakura o ngā purapura o Te Aroha and Te Hauna Kaha Kapahaka with their waiata Rangi Aotearoa. Part of the waiata translates as Apakura, rise up, we are descendants, we are their descendants, restore the language and the traditions handed down. Go back and let's move forward and lift up the force of the ancestors. For life, for this generation, keep your identity, hold on to your identity. It will live on, show the world your heart. And so what a beautiful start to our session. Kia ora e te whānau, ko Atama Aho, a proud, very proud NZDI member for the last 10 years. Born and bred in West Auckland. I am Samoan and Māori on my dad's side. And very, very happy to be here and be joined by such wisdom on our panel. So this evening, we are joined by Dr. Carwyn Jones, Kaiahotu of Te Whare Whakatupu Mātauranga, who teaches at Te Wānanga o Raukawa, and Barrister Max Harris. Kia ora to the both of you. Before they introduce themselves, we can start with our karakia. All right, so tiria mai te aroha o te rangi, tiria mai te aroha o te whenua, kia toitu te tiriti, he tuopapa mo te miro mā te miro whiro, me te miro pango, waiho ano mā te ture, te whakapono me te arona, he whakapumo I tere here tangata. Haumie, huie, taiki e. Carwyn and Max, can you please briefly introduce yourselves?
O tēnā tātou, ko Carwyn Jones tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Ngāti Kahununu ki te Wairoa. So my name's Carwyn, my iwi's Ngāti Kahununu, from the Wairoa end of Kahununu. And as Arama's mentioned, I work at Te Wānanga o Raukawa, and I teach in the Māori Laws and Philosophy program there. My background is in law, and I'm also an honorary adjunct professor in the School of Māori Studies at Te Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora.
Tēnā tātou, ko Max Harris tōku ingoa, he Pākehā ahau. My name is Max, I'm Pākehā. My family's from a town called Seven Sisters in South Wales, and Birmingham in England, and Glasgow in Scotland. I'm a barrister at Thorndon Chambers, working mostly in public law, and I do some criminal law. And I also work part-time at Action Station. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tēnā kouroa, Carwyn and Max. Us being here this evening means being here for our tamariki mokopuna and the education they deserve. It means valuing Te Tiriti or Waitangi and its critical place in education. We know that the Crown, with teachers and kaiako as its actors, are partners to Te Tiriti or Waitangi with iwi Māori. We also know that Māori educators are in the position of actors of the Crown on one hand and tangata whenua on the other. As educators, we are collectively responsible for protecting and progressing Te Tiriti in education. This is our statutory responsibility, enshrined in the Education Act, our teaching standards, and the code. It is also our moral imperative. We are spread all around the motu. Our numbers are our strength, and together we will protect and progress Te Tiriti or Waitangi in education. And we are so glad you have joined us this evening. Carwyn and Max will share their knowledge and expertise of what it means to defend Te Tiriti. Together, we will talk about how this is essential to achieving equity and justice for Māori. But before we get into that kōrero, I'm just going to get Carwyn and Max to lay out the land for this kōrero, and just to give us a rundown of what this might look like. So Carwyn, we'll start with you if that is all good.
Kia ora, Atama. So I guess we're going to be focusing quite a bit on the Treaty Principles Bill in our discussion this evening. But one of the things that's probably important to note in terms of the context that we're in at the moment is that Treaty Principles Bill is coming as part of a number of measures that the coalition government is taking, which is attempting to roll back Māori rights in all kinds of different ways. And we've seen this through issues relating to the Māori wards and local government, the establishment of the Māori Health Authority, the changes that are being made in terms of the Taku Taimoana, the Marine and Coastal Area Act. So the Treaty Principles Bill is part of that broader slew of activity on the government's part, and it comes after a process we've been going through for the last 30 years or more, in which there's been a process of working through claims in the Waitangi Tribunal, and from around the mid-1990s, a systematic process of settling of the historical claims. And the settlement of those historical claims has included not only some, return of some lands and some financial redress, but often includes measures in terms of new kinds of relationships or partnership agreements, the kinds of co-governance type measures that we've seen in the spotlight and indeed being rolled back. And so this Treaty Principles Bill and these other measures are coming after kind of slow and painstaking progress in trying to provide better opportunities for Māori input and participation into decision-making across a whole range of measures and providing some small measure of redress in relation to those historical claims. So that's a little bit of the context, but Max might have a few more things to add there.
Thank you, Carwyn.
Kia ora, Carwyn, and kia ora, Atama. I also just want to say thanks to everyone at NZEI who's organised tonight, especially Anaru and Jesse, and just wanted to acknowledge all the teachers and kayako on the call. I had incredible primary school teachers who had kind of first opened up to our Māori, I think, to me at Clyde Key School in Wellington, and then I had a particularly memorable high school history teacher, Gregor Fountain, who also taught me a lot of what I know about Te Tiriti. Carwyn's given great historical context there, and also wanted to acknowledge Carwyn, who's done really thoughtful, amazing academic work, and also made a lot of this material accessible, including in a primer on the Treaty Principles Bill that's available. I'll just make 3 quick points. One is, as a Pākehā person, I see Te Tiriti as my basis for being in this country, as a foundation. Second point, kind of building on what Carwyn's saying, is I guess the question arises, like, why is there this assault now on Māori rights across the board? And I think there's several answers to that, but I think part of it is that Te Tiriti is perceived as a threat to some of the commercial and wealthy interests represented by this government and parts of this government in particular. And the third thing I just wanted to say is, as a Tauiwa person, as a Pākehā person, I think we have a particular responsibility to speak up against this onslaught on Māori rights as people who have benefited from an unjust system and as people who have our basis in this place because of Te Tiriti. Thanks, Atama.
Kia ora, Max and Carwyn. And yes, Jesse will be sharing some awesome documents in the chat bar team if you wanted to access those as we have our cordial. So, Carwyn, a few weeks ago, the Ministry of Education released a consultation document on proposed changes to Section 127 of the Education Act. This is the section that sets out the obligations of school boards in governing schools. Throughout the proposal document, they write Te Tiriti or Waitangi, dash the Treaty of Waitangi. However, in the Act, it is only Te Tiriti or Waitangi that is given effect to. We have heard from our members that there is still confusion among them and in their communities between these two documents. Can you please give us a 101 on what the difference between the two documents is and why it matters?
Sure. Probably the first thing that I would say is that I tend to, rather than try and focus on those differences, I will come to talk about those, but rather than focus on the differences in the meanings between the text, I think first of all it's helpful just to recognise that Te Tiriti, the Māori text, is the authoritative text, and there are various reasons why we might recognise that, but not least because almost all the rangatira who signed the te reo text of Te Tiriti. Also, all of the explanation and discussion which took place around that was in te reo, and so the understanding is grounded in that te reo text. So, of course, there is an English draft of Te Tiriti, and I've heard Margaret Mutu use this language, and I think it's quite a helpful way of phrasing it, to think of that English draft as a draft version. So yes, it might help us to understand a little bit of the context and inform the context, but it's not like we're trying to reconcile two equal status versions. What we have is an authoritative text in Te Reo Māori, and we have a draft English text that can help to inform our thinking as other parts of the context can. And so when we look at the Te Reo text, when we look at Te Tiriti, really I think the kind of two big ideas there are thinking about kāwanatanga and tino rangatiratanga. And so the kāwanatanga is that authority that's being granted to the British Crown, it's been granted by the rangatira to the British Crown to have authority of government, the intention is over the Crown's own subjects who are here, over the settler population who are here. And you can see that it's not intended to be authority over Māori, because what's guaranteed in Article 2 of Te Tiriti is tino rangatiratanga, the authority held by the rangatira in relation to their own communities. And so that's what Te Tiriti talks about, and I think it's helpful to focus on those two ideas of kāwanatanga and tino rangatiratanga, and try and work through what the relationship between them is in the different contexts that we're faced with today. But just because people have been asking about the differences, I don't want to ignore that part of it. And so when we look at that English draft, there is slightly different language that's used. Well, it's English for a start, but so that it talks about the authority that is going to the British Crown as this idea of sovereignty. And there's some discussion around exactly what that term sovereignty was intended to encompass in 1840, but it probably looks a little bit different to the authority of kāwanatanga that's set out in Te Tiriti. Also, when we look at the nature of the guarantee as it's set out in the English draft version, the guarantees are largely framed around what we might think of as kind of property kinds of rights. And whereas, of course, in Te Tiriti, what is set out and guaranteed there is this right of tino rangatiratanga, which does include the kinds of relationships we would think of as being involved in rights to land and property interest, but as a much broader authority than that. So that's probably where I'd leave that.
Kia ora, Carwyn. Max, a small number of English acting on behalf of the Crown signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi in 1840. Act talks a lot about how new migrants fit into Aotearoa. What is meant by the Crown as party to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and where do Pākehā, tauiwi, and new migrants come in?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, Te Tiriti was signed by the British Crown, or William Hobson, on behalf of Queen Victoria, and I guess at the time this meant the British Crown, as Carwyn was saying, and over time the New Zealand Crown was established. The Crown generally in legal terms means the executive branch of government, so government and the public sector, but somewhat confusingly, it sometimes also refers to the other branches of government, so the courts and the legislature, the parliament as well, and it has this sort of umbrella authority over its sphere. But to come to your question about Pākehā and newer migrants, I think in context, when Te Tiriti was signed, the Crown was assuming some responsibility for the kind of peace among settlers, and I totally agree with what Carwyn said about there not being an intention for there to be authority over Māori, but there was a kind of responsibility assumed over some settlers. And now, of course, we have new migrants. I guess one point I'd just make is that, in my view, tauiwi is a big term and contains groups that are quite differently positioned. So there are Pākehā who, like myself, have benefited from the system. Then there are Pacifica people who talk of sharing the whakapapa with Māori. And then there are others like Asian New Zealanders and Black New Zealanders who talk about facing the white supremacy that has been embedded as part of colonization. And so, yeah, I guess we're all differently positioned within with different responsibilities, but I hope that answers some of that question.
So, kia ora. So, Carwyn, Te Tiriti o Waitangi consists of a preamble and 3 articles. In education, most teachers and kaiako are familiar with the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Where do these principles emerge from, and why are we working with principles and not the articles themselves?
So the principles have come to be used as a kind of legal mechanism and as a kind of preferred mechanism of government, really, in engaging with Te Tiriti. And, we really start to see the principles being used from when the Waitangi Tribunal's established in 1975. Its jurisdiction is based on this concept of the principles of the treaty. The tribunal, in interpreting and applying the principles, is required to look at both English text and Maori text of Te Tiriti and the treaty in determining and applying what those principles. And we've also seen the principles be used in legislation. And so when that happens, then the courts get an opportunity to chip in and interpret and apply principles in that context. And part of the reason, and in fact, probably the main reason that the government prefers to work with this concept of treaty principles rather than the articles themselves is because it actually waters down the application of tino rangatiratanga. It waters down the scope of tino rangatiratanga to use treaty principles. And it provides a mechanism to attempt to reconcile that authority of tino rangatiratanga with the kind of existing assertion of Crown sovereignty as it is. And so it is a mechanism which has been used to do that. And that's not to say that the principles haven't been important in making some progress within that framework of Crown sovereignty. So, for example, we've seen the Waitangi Tribunal dealing with a range of issues, including, one of the most significant claims that the tribunal dealt with early on was the Te Reo Māori claim, and we're into Wiki o Te Reo Māori this week. The Te Reo Māori claim led to the establishment of the recognition of Te Reo Māori as an official language, the establishment of Te Taurawhiri Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Commission. So those principles were used to help help progress some of those issues, as I say, within the current framework that we have. So we come to be familiar with some key principles. For example, the kind of idea of partnership is well recognized. Ideas around active protection. We often hear talk of participation as a principle that government uses as well. And, we actually have built up through 50 years of work of the Waitangi Tribunal, through nearly 40 years of the courts engaging with treaty principles, this kind of whole body of law, which gives quite a lot of certainty around how those principles, what those principles are and how they're to be applied.
Awesome. Thank you. Max and Carwyn, last year, ACT's attempt at rewriting the principles was made public, and now the actual draft has surfaced. The principles are very different to the existing and accepted principles and don't resemble the articles of Te Tiriti or Waitangi. The proposed principles are the government of New Zealand has full power to govern. The Crown recognises the rights that Hapu and Iwi had when they signed the treaty. And the third is everyone is equal before the law. Can you each talk to this draft and what it means for us? And yeah,
awesome. So I think the key difference in this bill is about how it interprets tino rangatiratanga. And yeah, Carwyn's already talked about the treaty principles as a watering down of tino rangatiratanga, that ultimate paramount chiefly authority for Māori. So one of the first leaks we had of the treaty principles bill had these three principles sort of mirroring the articles of Te Tiriti, and then where you would expect tino rangatiratanga, the second principle, rather than talking about tino rangatiratanga for Māori, as is in Te Tiriti, talked about chieftainship for all New Zealanders. And that is very different. I'm sure everyone would agree. Now, the latest draft that's been released, and you're right, Atama talks in its heading about, in that principle, about the rights of hapu and iwi. But if you read on to what has been released so far, it says that the rights of hapu and iwi will only differ from those rights enjoyed by everyone else if specified in legislation, in treaty settlements, or if otherwise agreed with the Crown. So it's essentially cutting tino rangatiratanga back to the concessions that have been made by the Crown to iwi and hapu as at 2024. And actually, even though there's been this adjustment, I think all that it reveals is that the common thread in this bill, in its different versions, is its attack on tino rangatiratanga and its attempt to cut down what tino rangatiratanga is. And as was said in the Waitangi Tribunal recent hearing on the Treaty Principles Bill, as was said by Margaret Mutu, Professor Margaret Mutu, this distorts what is in Te Tiriti. It's dishonest. And David Seymour has been going around with a straight face, talking about not just his bill, but also Te Tiriti, and saying, oh, the second article is about chieftainship for all New Zealanders. And I find that just very disingenuous and dishonest. But as well, it clearly significantly intrudes on rights that were affirmed and guaranteed by Te Tiriti or Waitangi. I'm sure Carwyn could say more and better, but that's a start.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I absolutely agree with what you've talked about there, in particular in relation to the way in which, that second principle there is still very much directed at constraining tino rangatiratanga, and it's setting it in the context of saying that authority of tino rangatiratanga is to be determined by the Crown. It's whatever the Crown agrees or accepts. And that's not what tino rangatiratanga is about. But that's essentially what the entire bill is premised on, is this idea that the Crown has the right to say what this agreement means without any reference to, certainly no reference to in consultation with Māori, but also no real reference to the text or the history of Te Tiriti or the application of treaty principles either. And so, I would say the Ministry of Justice officials have recognised that certainly that second principle is not consistent with tino rangatiratanga, so not consistent with Te Tiriti. And I would suggest that those other two principles are not what Te Tiriti talks about either. So I think the whole thing is quite disconnected from reality in that sense.
Tautoko. So, Carwyn, in the Education Act and other education documents, we find the words giving effect to Te Tiriti or Waitangi. We know the national-led coalition government wants to rewrite the principles and has made moves to weaken Te Tiriti's place in education. A few weeks ago, the Ministry of Education began consulting on proposed changes to Section 127 of the Education Act. And this is the section that directs the objectives of school boards and governing kura and schools. As it currently stands, there are 4 interconnected objectives. The school gives effect to Te Tiriti or Waitangi as one of them. The Luxon-led government is proposing to demote 3 of the 4 objectives, replacing them with one primary objective, attaining the highest possible standard in educational achievement. This singular objective is one of the current 4. The 3 demoted as distinct objectives would become secondary objectives, retained only as necessary to the achieving the highest possible standard in educational achievement. On the face of it, this looks like moving chairs around on the deck. Is there more to it? what can we understand from this kind of change?
Well, I think certainly it is about, demoting the priority of those other objectives. There's no doubt about that. And, that's kind of explicit really in the changes that are being proposed. And so it is about subordinating, and we're thinking about Te Tiriti this evening, certainly about subordinating those rights to again, whatever the government determines might be the objective. But I also think just more broadly, and of course, probably the NZIA members will have much more of a sense of the impact of some of this than I might. But it does strike me that these changes are also framed around or embedding quite a narrow view of actually what education might be about.
For sure. Yeah. So just we'll go to you, Max. Some of us are hearing that the Treaty Principles Bill is about having a national discussion, but we also know that Te Tiriti and treaty education is quite low nationally. Our members are really enjoying teaching Aotearoa New Zealand's histories in schools now, and teachers in Kaiako are learning so much ourselves. Do we as a nation understand our history enough to understand what is being proposed in the bill? Do you have any suggestions as to how we can talk about Te Tiriti or Waitangi together?
There are lots of great points in that question, Atama. So just to pick up on the first thing you said, I think we all need to cut through this idea that it's about a national conversation. I mean, first of all, conversations are usually between two parties, and this is a conversation that the Crown is having with itself without consulting Māori. Yeah, at the moment, there's a lot that doesn't fit with conversation. And there have been also many other attempts to start constitutional conversations on constructive terms. For example, the Mātike Mai report, which maybe could be linked to in the chat, and we could talk more about. But to come to your question on history, yeah, I felt really lucky to learn New Zealand history in year 13. I think a short answer is, I think Pākehā in particular could know more about our country's history. I think also you find a lot, even in good history books and museum exhibits, much less space devoted to pre-colonial history. So often like a single exhibit on 800 years of history or a single chapter. And I think it's only now that I think Pākehā are coming to grips in particular with like the really rich wealth of knowledge in relation to science, in relation to politics and tikanga and law that comes from that early history. But to kind of connect it to the present, I think greater history understanding definitely would be optimal. But I think most people do believe learning history is important. So Human Rights Commission did a poll at the end of last year, and it showed that 83% of people felt that learning about New Zealand history was important. And so what I would encourage us all to do is to upskill through coming along to webinars like this, or do reading like reading Carwyn's primer. I don't think you have to be a lawyer or a historian to have a conversation about the Treaty Principles Bill and why it's wrong and why it's worrying. But of course, with the great work of teachers, we should all continue to learn more about the history of this place.
I think we have such a, there's such a teacher shortage, and we're getting this great influx of teachers from all over the world, which is amazing. We're enriching our perspectives, and I do really push that learning about our histories should be a prerequisite. Our teachers who are teaching our tamariki should understand the context that they are teaching in, and really do really do carry that, because there's so much for our kids to unleash. But Carwyn, there is a lot of anti-Māori sentiment now, comments about special privilege, messages and race-based policies. What is the reality, and where does this thinking come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually, Peter Meihana has done some really good work on thinking about this idea of privilege, and kind of where that comes from. And he talks about it as having quite deep roots, and in fact, linking back even to Te Tiriti in the sense of the colonial settlers felt that entering into a treaty with Maori was something that Maori ought to be grateful for, that they should feel privileged, that that they should feel privileged, but in fact that they were privileged, that that the Crown was entering into a treaty agreement with us. And so Peter Meihana talks about, there's this very strong thread from the earliest colonial times here of a sense of Maori privilege. And of course, we've seen that played up for political purposes, most recently through the last election by, I think, all the parties in the coalition government, but also, one former famous example was Don Brash's Aotearoa speech, which picked up, used that language of privilege and really drove that idea for political advantage. But of course, the reality is very different. Maori are far from privileged in the context of a range of socioeconomic indicators that we can identify. And when we look at what actually Maori are seeking through and using Te Tiriti as a mechanism for having a discussion about how we might want to have participation in decision making or involvement in co-governance, whether that relates to areas of the natural environment or areas of social policy. What we're talking about is not about having a privileged position. It's really about having access to the things that all New Zealanders have access to, in terms of, we would like our health needs taken care of in the way that other New Zealanders' health needs are taken care of. We would like not to die 8 years earlier than other New Zealanders. We would like to have a say in the welfare of our children in a way that is appropriate for our communities, and not have our kids taken away. There's a whole range of areas where actually what we're seeking through these mechanisms of Te Tiriti and the mechanisms of more self-determination is really about exercising and having access to the kind of same kind of autonomy as a community and self-determination that a lot of New Zealanders already currently enjoy.
Max and Carwyn, teachers in kaiako come from all different backgrounds. Kaiako Māori find themselves in a unique position as iwi Māori and as actors of the Crown through their profession. We know that protecting Te Tiriti and education is everyone's responsibility, and that we each have those responsibilities. Do you have any tips for what educators can be doing right now to protect and advance Te Tiriti or Waitangi in education? And we'll start with you, Max.
Yeah, so tips on advancing and protecting Te Tiriti in education. I've found that having conversations grounded in values are really helpful. And, that matike in my report that I mentioned starts with some key values. So taking these policy questions back to basic values that we all understand and have pictures of in our everyday lives, or basic ideas like sticking to our promises as a reason to, honor the agreement in Te Tiriti. I think being clear about what Te Tiriti says is very important, and teachers in kaiako play such an important role in communicating that, so that we can see the distortion of the Treaty Principles Bill for what it is. If we have a good grounding in what Tino Rangatiratanga meant and what Kāwanatanga meant, as Carwyn was pointing out. So yeah, those are a couple of tips. I think coming back to values and being clear. I think thinking locally is good, and one of the things that brought alive my study of New Zealand history when I was in high school in Pōneke in Wellington was, a history teacher that was connecting the history to the place and the community that we're in. And there's a lot of resources out there, including Waitangi Tribunal reports that help to connect us all up locally. There's one resource that I just mentioned is Matariki Ka and I did a presentation on how to have a conversation about the Treaty Principles Bill with Action Station, and that's online. And the idea was that we kind of put some of the common counter arguments to each other and tried to arm us all with some good responses to, the common arguments, but like, don't we believe in equality? These kinds of arguments. And maybe have a look at some resources like that, or Carwyn's primer, to feel really confident to go out and have those conversations.
Kia ora, Max, great resources. And Carwyn, over to you.
Oh, I like the way Max has mentioned my primer so many times tonight. There are other resources too, but Max made some really good points there, and I think particularly that piece about the point about thinking about making those local connections is a really good one. One of the things that I've often observed with Waitangi Tribunal hearings is that partly those can be places where the Māori community is often coming together to hear stories about their place, their land, their rohe, but also when Pākehā are involved in those, attend those inquiries, which, they're public inquiries, and, often certainly the historical claims inquiries were held locally, that when Pākehā or tauiwi attend those hearings too, that they're often really engaged with hearing about the area that they know, hearing about, why one street is named after some colonial official and one other street's named after the local rangatira from the time, and hearing those stories and understanding better some of what's happened in New Zealand history. And that's not about, this is not about people feeling guilty. That's not the purpose of understanding our history, but it's to know what's taken place, to think about, well, what steps can we take then where wrongs have occurred? What can we do to make good on those wrongs that have taken place? So, and also, as Max said, there are some great resources to talk about those local connections, both in Waitangi Tribunal reports, but some of the resources around the He Tohu exhibition at the National Library, which the He Tohu exhibition includes Te Tiriti, He Whakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence, and the Women's Suffrage Petition. But some of those resources which look at, identify, well, who were the people who signed Te Tiriti, for example, and give people an opportunity to connect in with the local people, the people that are relevant to their communities who signed Te Tiriti. And so I think those can also be a great way to do it. And as Max said, that also that conversation about values is, I think, a really important place to start, because that helps people to move away from being in set positions to trying to see think about, actually where there are shared values and we can talk about. And one of the things that the Mātiki Mai report does is, it's very much grounded in values, and it comes from conversations had amongst a number of hui held with Māori, but what part of the purpose of that report was always to take that report to other New Zealanders to say, well, you know, here are the things that Māori have identified, the values that we see as important for us in our government and our constitution. You know, are these things that resonate with you? Are there different things that you would like to see included or you feel are important? And so I think that can be a really good starting place for a conversation too.
Max and Carwyn, as you know, we have some amazing NZRI members who are tuning in, and you know, this kōrero has really inspired some pātai coming through. And I just wanted to ask a pātai on behalf of a member who asked, so tangata tiriti is all non-Māori, as they understand it to mean. And is this a helpful term? So can we just explore that a little bit? What does tangata tiriti mean, and is that term helpful? And we can go with Max or...
You want to go first, Carwyn?
Owen? Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, I quite like the term tangata tiriti in the sense that I think that it does provide quite an inclusive approach. You know, it's an inclusive term. And I think it's also a nice kind of partner to tangata whenua. So you have tangata whenua and tangata tiriti. And I also think that if people identify as tangata tiriti, then that provides in their identity a sense of belonging here, a sense of how they connect to Te Tiriti and belong here in Aotearoa.
Kia ora.
I can't add too much better to that, but I also find it a helpful term. Sometimes it gets used in kind of two different senses, I think. So one sense is sort of as tangata tiriti as tauiwi, as non-Māori, and then sometimes I think it gets used more as about kind of people who have been sort of like visibly committed to Te Tiriti, and I think that can be subtly different. But as Carwyn said, you know, at a time when the government is trying to stop us all from talking about Te Tiriti, removing Te Tiriti as a touchstone, I think bringing that into conversation is a good thing. And my Action Station colleagues would kick me if I didn't mention that another way to try to advance this is Action Station at the moment has a Together for Te Tiriti campaign where you can get a placard to show your commitment to Te Tiriti. A lot of tangata tiriti have been involved with that, and there's a website with further resources also on the Treaty Principles Bill.
Jesse has also just shared some links onto the chat team. You know, so I think there's one that she's just shared. It's the Treaty Bill. She's got a link in there. Please, we urge you to commit to, I don't know if she has sent it, to submitting against the bill, and keep up to date to the future events. Keep yourselves informed, follow along. There's a link that she has sent through here. And let's get active, team. Together is our strength. And so there's some links that are being put through. So thank you to the team for doing that. Does anybody else have any pātai? Feel free to send them through. And Max has got a pātai.
I'll just mention something that's just kind of hot off the press today. So that is that the Waitangi Tribunal's just announced that it's going to reconvene for a further hearing on the latest developments around the Treaty Principles Bill on Friday, the 4th of October, in a one-day hearing. So just also look out for that. I think it's going to be all online. But yeah, keep following that. That will be another opportunity to talk about this and have conversations with other people about the bill and Te Tiriti. Awesome. Thank you, Max.
I'm just going to check to see if there's any other pātai from our members. The intent of Te Tiriti is so clear in Lord Normansby letter to Hobson. Yeah, Erica. Look, before we close this evening, I have some pānui for the members. Kia hiwara, kia hiwara. Things are moving fast, whānau. We've got to prepare ourselves. In the coalition agreement, Christopher Luxon committed the National Party to supporting the Treaty Principles Bill on the first reading in the House. We need to send a strong message that there is a mass opposition to the bill. Will you commit to submitting against the bill? Sign up with the link to that in the chat to receive support with your submission and to hear about upcoming NZDI webinars and actions. And the first of these actions is our monthly organising hui. We have one next week, so lock this date in, team. Wednesday, the 25th of September, at 7:30 p.m. And you can sign up here. Thank you, Anaru has sent the link there. If you would like to become a member of NZDI, there is also a link in the chat. And finally, join our Toitu Te Tiriti NZDI Facebook page to join the kōrero and stay up to date. And you can also grab some NZDI Toitu Te Tiriti merchandise in the links that have just been sent through. There's an action station link, and make a submission against the proposed changes to section 127 of the Education Act and the NALP. All of these links will be sent to the attendees in a follow-up email. I'm just going to scroll up here because I just see we've got a partai for you both. Where is a good place to start a Te Tiriti conversation with a neighbour, colleague, family member if they don't know much about what is going on? Carwyn.
Order. So yeah, I mean, I think that the place to start really is to think about as Max has talked about, the kind of values that we might share and that we can ground those conversations in. And so, I sometimes think rather than leaping in straight away to talk about Te Tiriti, is to talk about, talk about the way in which decisions which affect our lives get made, and the way in which we would all like to have some say and input into those decisions that affect our lives, and the way in which we would all like to be valued for the distinctive things that we might bring to those decisions, and to ground the conversation in those kinds of things. And then, if people are asking about Te Tiriti, there are lots of good resources that I think you can point people towards if they want to get just a kind of basic grounding. And some of those might be written resources, some of them might be things that you can watch or listen to, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think where I would, the way in which I think it's helpful to frame the conversation is to think about Te Tiriti as a mechanism that's really helpful for all of us in terms of thinking about how we bring different perspectives into decision making, about the ways in which we value each other, and the way in which actually it can help us to solve some of the pressing issues that all of us are confronting.
Yes. Max agrees.
Yeah, I agree again on values and thinking about, values like honesty and sticking to our promises. I think there's, at least in some communities I've connected with, I see in some Pākehā, maybe some uncertainty, but often coupled with like a little bit of instinctive concern about this bill. And I think we can maybe help people to move that uncertainty into a place of learning and into a place of action. So encouraging people to learn some more and to, follow that instinctive discomfort about this bill. And I like what Carwyn was saying as well about, coming back to what Te Tiriti is. It's about how we make decisions in this country, given our history. I also think that, just speaking again as a Pākehā person, there is a lot of positivity, sometimes expressed, sometimes unexpressed, about aspects of Māori culture that infuse this place and our communities, whether that's through waiata or haka or te reo Māori. And I think there are connections that can be drawn between those things and Te Tiriti. Te Tiriti, after all, is the foundation that has enabled Pākehā like myself to be around that culture and to learn from it and to be enriched by it. And so if we want to continue to benefit from all of that, I think we have to take seriously the foundations of this place, and Te Tiriti is part of it.
Could I just add one more thing to that? One of the things that Max touched on earlier actually was that these are conversations which have been going on and are continuing to go on, and that actually would encourage people to engage in those conversations. But as Max pointed out earlier, a kind of one-directional broadcast from politicians is not really a helpful and constructive way to have that discussion. But there are lots of ways in which we can talk about this with each other, and that people should feel safe and comfortable in doing that.
Just very quickly, we were warned about this by our brothers and sisters from Australia after the appalling result from the Yes campaign. Would you say this is our moment in this regard?
Well, I mean, it has some similarities in terms of the kind of idea of a referendum, and we're hopefully we won't get to that point. It does also have, again, as Max pointed out earlier, some concerning potential connections for this to be pushed by corporate interests who are not really interested in the well-being of Aotearoa or the social cohesiveness or giving effect to Indigenous rights, any of those kinds of things. And so, that was one of the things that we saw play a role in the referendum in Australia. But I think, the best response for us in this moment is to encourage people to have good faith conversations around Te Tiriti, to not buy into what is being pushed by, in this case, the coalition government, but to find those spaces to have those really collaborative and constructive conversations with each other.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think I agree with the connections that Carwyn's drawn. There has also been talk about a referendum if the Treaty Principles Bill doesn't go past Select Committee, and talk of Hobson's pledge organising for a citizens-initiated referendum, which would require 10% of voters. And I think that's one answer to the question of doesn't this all not matter because it's only going to go to Select Committee? Well, all this matters hugely, first of all, because Te Tiriti is being degraded just in the conversation. But secondly, because if we can mobilize now and use this as a positive moment, we can also ensure we don't have that sort of ghost referendum emerging when the bill does fail. So yeah, I think let's sort of turn this into a moment for education, and a moment that ensures no distortion of Te Tiriti is ever able to get this far again.
Kia ora e te whānau. That brings our kōrero to a close. Kaiako, we need to mobilise. It is with such excitement that we build our collectiveness together. We power together helps to ensure that Te Tiriti is protected and we can progress it in education. I thank you, Carwyn and Max. And maybe the both of you could perhaps share a link to a resource or a reading that's influenced you, and we can send that out to all our attendees because it's just been such a great kōrero. This webinar has been recorded. Everything that has been mentioned, all the links will be shared in the chat. A huge mihi to you, Carwyn and Max. Thank you for giving up your time and your wisdom. It was a rich and cordial, so thank you both. We're going to end with the karakia. Tu tawa mai I runga, tu tawa mai I raro, tu tawa mai I roto, tu tawa mai I raro. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, taiki e.